If anyone else comes along and nowadays or something like that. First and foremost, kind of let me introduce myself. You see down my name is Mary. I am a third year PhD student here in the department. So what my PhD is about, it's an experience-centred design inquiry into the patient-caregiver relationship in the context of dementia. But I'll touch on that as we kind of move along. My supervisor is Professor McCarthy here in the department, and you'll see there when I'm based here, a PhD student of Digital Arts and Humanities, so that's basically where my funding is coming from. So I'm in a class with a lot of people coming from, say, English, music, history, but we all have an interest in technology, either designing it or applying it, I suppose, with the intention to better understand humanity, I suppose. So if you have any questions about all that, that's at the end. Next thing is, I know we're very aware, well maybe not aware of me, the as drop pen, is the camera in the room. Please try not to pay much attention. I don't want to stand here for kind of 2 hours and talk at you, so I'd like to have a bit of discussion going. So try and block it out as much as we possibly can. That said, if there is anything that kind of you want to ask, but you prefer to do it off the camera, come up to me later on, send me an email, there's no problem with that either. Okay? Yeah, does that sound like a plan? Okay, so the title of today's class is HCI and Vulnerability. Now, I put up some readings there yesterday. Did anyone get a chance to have a look at them? Don't worry if you didn't, there'll be no exams on the readings. And as I go along, there's some more readings I put up on the slides. Don't worry if you can't take them down, I'll make sure they're available on Blackboard to you as well. But I sometimes find kind of after having the class, it gives a bit more interest in what papers to actually read and puts things kind of in a bit of perspective, okay? So kind of before, I suppose, trying to give you an idea of what we'll be doing. As I said, I don't want to stand here and talk at you, so just give you a kind of a feel of where we'll be going with this. So first of all, I want to make an attempt to define vulnerability, kind of using definitions that are already out there, and then putting those apart maybe, and hearing your own definitions as well. And as well as that, I suppose the vulnerability in doing so the vulnerability in defining someone as vulnerable as well. Okay, so that's something that I want to talk about. After that, it's going to be kind of some examples of digital designs in vulnerable contexts. Now, I think Kenny's deeper telling me what you would have done so far. There's been a lot of kind of theory-based stuff. So today's kind of an application, I suppose, of technologies in these settings to give kind of a feel of what's being done. The next thing after that is I want to discuss something that's, I suppose, of major interest to me at the moment, and that's researcher vulnerability itself. So we'll talk about that probably kind of closer to the end. And then just a wrap up and questions at the end, recapping on what we did and what we took from it, and if there's any questions left over from that. So before I kind of go on, like when you heard, okay, this week HCI and vulnerability, is there anything that kind of you thought, okay, this is what it's going to be, this is what we're going to be covering? Did you have any thoughts on what may be coming up, I suppose, in the next year and a bit?
I suppose how HCI is used for a vulnerable population, I suppose, practicality.
That's it. And we'll be definitely looking at that kind of practical application of technologies in these vulnerable contexts. I suppose to begin with, here's one paper that I would highly recommend reading as well. Now, it's written in the context of learning disabilities, but it's a fantastic read because it really pulls apart this notion of vulnerability and questions it. And the one thing it highlights is that there are many interpretations of vulnerability in relation to common usage of language, but a clear, unambiguous definition remains elusive, and that's certainly the case. So what I'm going to do now is, I suppose, as we progress, I'm going to read some bits, talk a bit more kind of ad lib, and get some kind of discussion going with yourselves as well. So, although kind of with the definitions out there, there's common themes across them, there's still kind of enough for difference to lead to confusion, especially in healthcare settings, of what vulnerability is. So its origin, the Oxford Dictionary states, its origin is in the Latin word vulnerabilius, I hope I pronounced that right, meaning to wound, and is defined as adjective exposed to being attacked or harmed. Cambridge also defines vulnerability as an adjective, however, in contrast to the Oxford Dictionary definition of openness to harm, it refers more to possibility or potential as follows. So, able to be easily physically, emotionally, or mentally hurt, influenced, or attacked. So, this kind of leads us back to lack of clarity in the care setting, where staff bring their own meanings to the term, and this is something that Carly discusses at length. What happens when there's all these definitions, when care staff are coming into that with their own take on what vulnerability is, this can lead to problems. So legislative and policy documents that refer to vulnerability from a care perspective often provide for our definitions. In the care context, vulnerability generally means open to exposure to harm. Typically, the description is of people in receipt of care services, and this, of course, requires that people are labelled. And if I say to someone in a healthcare setting in care services, what would we label those groups? So, what kind of groups can we think of who might be in, say, a care setting? And I would say
elderly people.
Exactly, that's one that we'll be looking at today. Yeah, we definitely come across that. Any other groups that we can think of?
People with intellectual disabilities.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. That's another area we'll be looking at. So you can see all these kind of labels that we automatically think of certain groups that we perceive as vulnerable. Now, there is, I suppose, some textbook definitions that's supplied in this paper as well of vulnerability. So those in residential accommodation provided in connection with care or nursing or in receipt of the ministry care services, those receiving health care, those in lawful custody or under the supervision of a probation officer, those receiving a welfare service of a prescribed prescription or direct payments from a social services authority, those receiving services or taking part in activities aimed at people with disabilities or special needs because of their age or state of health, and those who need assistance in the conduct of their affairs. Okay, so you're kind of getting the idea here that it's a long list that this label is covering. Another one there coming from the Department of Health and Home Office states that a vulnerable adult is a person who is or may be in need of community care services by reason of mental or other disability, age or illness, who is or may be unable to take care of him or herself or unable to protect him or herself against significant harm or exploitation. And I think when we start hearing words or seeing words like harm or exploitation, it kind of brings into question, okay, does vulnerability exist because of another? So the potential of another to help or to harm or to exploit. Okay, so we kind of have to think there, do we need another person in the context to make someone vulnerable in the first place? Okay. Now, one of the papers that I put up was heavily kind of philosophy based, but it was describing this notion of vulnerability as a principle for protecting research, or rather a description of the human condition. Now, it was very wordy, and it takes a bit of some time to read. But Wolfer had a really, really good paper this year. I tried actually to keep all the papers here as kind of recent as I could, just to give you an idea what people are talking about at the moment, what's, I suppose, live in research at the moment. And one of these papers was vulnerability or susceptibility. And they work a lot with people who are homeless, based in the US. But they're kind of coming on the back of this whole potential, say, another person with the ability or the potential to harm someone. And vulnerability and power dynamics can go hand in hand. So if we think of two situations, so if we think of abuse, okay, so in the context of abuse, vulnerable adults, vulnerability can be considered to be a social condition, because for vulnerability to be possible, there must be at least a second agent, okay, so there must be another person who's carrying out this abuse. In the cases of neglect, the absence of another may be the reason for neglect. So yes, an individual may feel vulnerable entirely by himself or herself, but they're saying that this is a different thing. Okay, so but what does that mean? So they attempt to define it in this split between vulnerability and susceptibility. So vulnerability has been used as a principle in consideration of protections for human research, okay, for a long time now, okay. But some scholars have questioned kind of the usefulness of this term as a principle for protecting research subjects, on the ground that vulnerability has been too broadly applied, really, and that vulnerability is not a principle at all, but rather a description of the human condition. So, taking this view, Levine and colleagues actually did a really interesting piece of research, and they argue that so many groups are considered vulnerable in the context of research that the concept has lost its force completely. And and actually they're speaking about in the US, and they say the sheer number of groups that have been described as vulnerable is overwhelming. So I'm just going to list out, when it comes to research, who's considered vulnerable, okay? So we have groups diverse as pregnant women, children, prisoners, students, employees, members of the armed forces or police, nursing home residents, people receiving welfare benefits or social assistance, other poor people, the unemployed, patients, some ethnic and racial minority groups, homeless persons, nomads, refugees, politically powerless individuals, and people unfamiliar with modern medical concepts. Okay, so that's a pretty exhaustive list, and it kind of begs the question, like, who isn't vulnerable? Is it just a case that we all are? Cotto argues then that since all human beings are vulnerable, groups of people labelled as vulnerable may be in fact susceptible. So this difference between kind of vulnerability and susceptibility is a subtle one, but Wolfram defines it here as vulnerability describes a state where harm is possible but has not already occurred, that applies to all. So we can all be vulnerable. Okay? On the other hand, susceptibility, susceptible people are those who are no longer in a state of unharmed vulnerability, since they have already been harmed in a way that leaves them open to further harm. Okay, so can we kind of see the point they're trying to make here is that yes, as humans we should all be vulnerable. Even in this context, as I'm standing here asking you questions, that can be a vulnerable situation. You know, I might feel vulnerable in that situation, you might feel vulnerable in it. So it applies to all. Susceptibility, they're saying, is something where people have already been exposed to harm and there's a potential for more harm to occur. Now, do any have any, and bear in mind because this term is so ambiguous, there's no right or wrong answers here, but do any of you have any kind of issues or thoughts around that notion of groups being vulnerable people defined as people who've been subjected to harm or might have the potential to be subjected to more? You know, because it's kind of, I suppose it begs further reading and so on, but you have to, when we're thinking of that the labels we give out, if you're saying someone's already been exposed to harm, what are we saying there? You know what I mean? Like if you're in a vulnerable, say you have an elderly person, say someone suffering from dementia, that I'm about to go through there now in a second. Have they been exposed to harm? Is that why they're vulnerable or susceptible? Can you say that they've been exposed to harm? You know, it's something worth thinking about. You know, there is no right or wrong answer here, but it's something I suppose what I want to do with this task is make you think about these concepts and kind of pull them apart a bit and see kind of how we can address these things. You'll see from a lot of my headings there I have ability at the end of vulnerability highlighted in a different way because I'm very much kind of an advocate of there's vulnerability is strength, not having a way out, that there is ability there, but maybe there is the context that these people are in is not suiting them or not encouraging this ability to come out. And us as researchers or designers are kind of making attempts to, I suppose, give a context to them so ability can come, that strength can come out of this. Not to completely kind of, I suppose, get rid of vulnerability, maybe in a way to kind of support it, to foster it, so we can do something positive with it, that we can strengthen people with it. I know Bill Morgan said regarding HCI that, you know, one of the great achievements that it made was that it made digital technologies available to ordinary people. Now, back in the day, say a few decades ago, you know, you couldn't use a computer unless you were a computer programmer. You know, there was no interfaces in ways that we are used to today. So the ordinary people in that sense was very much non-programmers, but in today's society that's not the case anymore, and it's really kind of, I suppose where we are today is that this ordinary people, there's different types of ordinary people. You know, and it's time to address that, and I can see the opportunities for design in there. Does that make sense? Yeah? I hope it does. Please stop me if it doesn't. So what I'm going to speak about now is this whole notion of kind of putting it in context, okay? And the first thing I'm going to speak about is dementia as one of those groups. Now, I suppose just a slight background on what dementia is, and then we'll talk about the technologies. So it's become known as the plague of the 21st century. It's in one of the top 5 causes of death in the Western world. There are 35 million sufferers of dementia worldwide, and 42,000 of those are coming from Ireland. And I know Trinity and NUIG, I think, did a report I think it was last year, and they're basically predicting, I'll put the readings on the blackboard, they're predicting that in the next 2 to 3 decades that this number is going to triple in Ireland, okay? So dementia is very much, it's part of our society, okay? It's something that's very, very real, and there's a high chance that some of us here in this room will be touched by it, either by someone we know, we might fall into caregiver roles, we've experienced it ourselves, but it's a very real issue. But what is it? Okay, yes, it's topical, but what exactly is dementia? So the DSM describe it as the development of multiple cognitive deficits that include memory impairment and at least one of the following cognitive disturbances: aphasia, apraxia, nausea, or a disturbance in executive functioning. It's progressive and irreversible, and it transmits through stages termed as mild, moderate, severe, and terminal. So that's very much kind of, I suppose, the medical definition of dementia. When it comes to the experience of dementia, Webster states that no one person experiences dementia in the same way, and that's very much the case. Okay, and that's, I think, the hardest part as well for obviously patients, but caregivers as well. There's no kind of what to expect next. You don't know what's coming next. And there's a lot, I suppose, when you're talking about these kind of this progression from mild to moderate. So a mild stage dementia, people can go about their daily tasks without too much difficulty. There's no issues there, but they might start misplacing things. They might have difficulty driving. They might start asking repetitive questions. As someone moves on to the more moderate kind of level, that's when care kind of comes into it. So, they start to experience more problems with daily living and kind of need of constant supervision. They also might experience delusions, hallucinations, and become much more aggressive. Then as you're moving on to kind of severe dementia, someone there is completely dependent upon others. They've lost their facial recognition, they've only a few words of speech, the people around them feel that the patient has lost their personality completely. And the final stage of terminal dementia means that the person is bedridden and uncomprehending completely, okay? So can we see there, kind of like if you're putting this apart, can you think of any situations there that you would class as vulnerable? Now I know this is kind of an obvious question to be asking. When you think of kind of, okay, someone who's at mild stages of dementia, okay, so they're going about their daily tasks, all right, no problem, but you're starting to get a bit forgetful, okay, and they're starting to notice this. Can you think of any kind of vulnerable situations that they might be in or experiencing at that stage?
If people didn't know that they were in the early stage of dementia, and so if people knew they could help, but if it's not noticeable, they could, things could happen and nobody would know that they had to help them.
Exactly, that's it. And that fear around it as well. If you start, say you don't know that you're experiencing it, and you're starting to get a bit forgetful, that'd be quite a scary process. It's like, how do you tell people this is going on? And unfortunately, in today's society, it's still a bit of a taboo. You know what I mean? Like traditionally, kind of, back in the years, I volunteered with the Alzheimer's Society, and they speak a lot of, like, many years ago, that people would just say about an elderly loved one and say, "Oh, she's not a bit dozy, or she's a bit forgetful," or something like that. And it was very much, it was a private thing, and there's still that element of taboo around it that people are still struggling with kind of naming it and discussing it. So there's that vulnerability there. As you move across, as you get into more moderate stage dementia, and especially kind of in relation, say, maybe to family and caregivers and so on, can you see any vulnerable situations there? Maybe not around the patient, maybe around the family members.
They didn't have a support system, have social support.
That's
they
it.
could get depression or something.
See, that's it, and it's that whole, dementia, what's associated with this memory loss is a kind of a SOAR describes it as a loss of self. So, and we mentioned it there, like loved ones see the kind of personality fading of a family member. So it's like you're losing that sense of self as your memory is starting to fade. Now, where I suppose technology and dementia is coming into play, it's not something novel. Technology has had a place in this context of working with the elderly and people suffering from dementia for some time now. But what I want to do is kind of highlight different technologies I often find, especially when I started on this journey that I'm on now, when you hear kind of technology, you have these presumptions in your head of what that is. It's like, okay, I'm going to put a computer in here, or I'm going to use such a thing, and it's, people are going to design this software, let's say, and you can have kind of generic, stereotypical images in your head. And what I really want to do today is to kind of show you the different variations of technologies that fall under this thing called design. In the case of, say, one is assisted technologies. Okay, so these, just examples of it there, kind of electronic memory aids would be a major thing in this area. It would be kind of things like, say, if you have a lot of medication to take, they'd send you a reminder to take that, so on and so forth. Very kind of functional kind of, I suppose, reasons for their existence. Also, as well as people suffering from dementia, they tend to wander. So you can imagine if they're in a care home and they start to wander outside. Okay, you can see the vulnerability in that situation. So there's various kind of alarms and sensors that have been put on the market as well and designed that if someone goes rambling, an alarm will sound and they'll be brought back in. Okay. Also, kind of another thing with dementia was kind of GPS tracking and this whole kind of rambling idea. So I was going to show a YouTube clip, but I'm kind of aware of how technology fails in these situations, so I'm just going to describe it instead. So it was these pair of shoes with GPS technology in them, so it could track kind of the patient as they're going about their daily basis, and if they got lost, that you would be able to locate them and find them and bring them back home. But the one thing is, I mean, my participants, if I showed them these shoes, they would throw their eyes to heaven because these shoes looked awful. They were the most aesthetically pleasing things you could imagine. So, whilst functionality is really important, it also has to be done in a certain way that kind of, I suppose, takes into account the daily experience and kind of preferences of that individual. Can we see anything else, just out of curiosity, and this notion of kind of GPS and tracking people? Can you see any other kind of vulnerable situations there, or vulnerability there?
If you're maybe perhaps an elderly person, you didn't know where you were. If you're after finding yourself somewhere, it might help to know where you are.
Exactly, yeah. And say if your loved one, say, knew where you were going, is there any kind of issues there that you can think of that might jump up as maybe vulnerable? But I'm kind of talking about, you have to look at the ethics around it as well. So it's just, I'm not going to go into it now, but it's something maybe to think of yourself, make a note of, read up some more on kind of like the ethical considerations about being able to track people's movements. Okay, where does privacy come into it? Also as well, I mean, there's just an example of some of like the cogno memory jog. There would be the electronic memory aids, numerous Safe 21, the alarms and sensors, and just that paper there as well. It's a nice read, puts all this stuff in perspective. But when it comes to these technologies, is functionality enough? Okay. Well, the function they're carrying out is extremely important and vital, and thankfully we have it. But say if someone goes rambling, yes, it brings them back in, but why did they go rambling in the first place? It doesn't tell us anything about that. Say the shoes, yes, it has a function. It doesn't really tell us much though about the whole experience of wearing those shoes or the consequences of that person and using this technology in the first place. And what I have there is it's important to consider kind of dementia patients experience technology, to not solely look at this and its functionality. And I'm kind of always cautious about saying kind of experience technology. A book I would highly recommend reading, actually, John McCarthy here in the department and Peter Wright in Newcastle wrote this book, Technology as Experience. And it's a worthwhile read because you have to ask in today's society, is there any difference in saying how people experience technology when technology is so ubiquitous? All our days we're surrounded by technology. Okay, it's not necessarily this thing anymore that's novel, part of our society. We're living in a digital culture. Okay, so experience covers technology in my eyes. But anyway, that's my input. So we have to kind of know, well, where can we go from here? So experience-centered design, I know you probably would have touched on this already. I think Kelly was telling me that she would have covered it. I'm not going to go over it again. I know we'll be touching on it more so as we go on, but I think it's perfectly situated in this notion of defining vulnerability and kind of, I suppose, highlight what I was saying there about bringing the ability out of vulnerability. It says that the real excitement of experience-centered design is to give people the chance to have a richer life, to include people who otherwise feel excluded, and to ensure that everybody has a chance to have their say, especially those who often feel voiceless. So can you see there why it's situated, and there's an opportunity there for experience-centered design in these cases. So to give you some examples of what I mean by that, okay? So you'll see a lot of the papers I've up here and a lot of examples I'm going to give are coming from Culture Lab, which is based in Newcastle University. Now, John will be heavily involved in work going on over there, and it's a site that I would highly recommend you visiting. It's I just call it out there. It's di.ncl.ac.uk. And basically it's a digital interaction lab, so it's full of, say, computer scientists, psychologists, artists. You know, at the very core of HCI, the reason HCI worked was because of the multidisciplinary groups within it. And there's really, really interesting examples of design, I suppose, of HCI design being done in that lab. So I'd highly recommend you looking at it, not just in the case of vulnerability, across the board. Okay, there's some really exciting stuff being done there. So a lot of the examples I'm going to give are from people who would have worked there and still do. So in the context of dementia, I suppose I got a really nice kind of analogy of what it was before in a Seb Hewson book called The Simplicity of Dementia. If you could picture your life all as books, so yesterday, let's say, was a book, and it's all standing on a bookshelf. When you start suffering from dementia, yesterday's book falls, and as you progress along the track, more books fall. So the last memory you're left with is a memory from many, many years ago, okay? And what has proved, I suppose, very successful, and I suppose more research has been done into it, is the whole role of reminiscence therapy in clinical settings. So reminiscence therapy is basically when you have people suffering from dementia and you're bringing in, let's say, old photographs, old objects that they would have been familiar with and would have used when they were maybe before dementia started affecting them, and getting to communicate around that. Okay, so when something's familiar, when you're feeling scared and you've got anxiety and you feel like you're losing that sense of self, and there's an object there that almost anchors you in now, it gives you a sense of who you are. If you can talk around that, if you can communicate to people that they, care staff are using these objects to, I suppose, increase interaction levels. It does have an effect, and it's been done a lot, and even I'm touching on it a lot in my own research. But this is an example of a technology that takes that into account. But this is work done by Dr. Jane Wallace, and she's a digital jewellery artist. I want to sit down now. Is that okay? Can you still see me if I sit down? A digital jewellery artist, and she conducted this really, I suppose, beautiful and sensitive piece of design with a couple, the wife of the couple, who was starting to suffer from mild dementia. So she spent some time with them, and she was interested in this whole notion of personhood, this whole notion of sense of self, and how to restore that in someone or support in someone when it's starting to fade. So the top example here is basically it's a locket that the lady wore, and every time you open the locket, a different image is displayed. And a lot of those images would have been from, say, old photographs, even more recent ones as well. But every time you open it, there's a different image there. So every time, this lady, we call her Gillian, every time she opened it, she saw someone new there. And it was something that kind of helped her keep a hold of that sense of self. The example at the bottom it's a beautiful example as well. Those little pieces of material that you see, they're actually cutouts from dresses that Gillian used to wear when she was younger. And I suppose all the dresses that she used to wear were similar shaped, the little brooch. Can you see the brooch on the material there? Just the shape. All her dresses were that kind of shape, so it was very kind of evocative to her, these materials. So when these materials came out in the, I suppose, research process, it brought back a lot of memories, and she was able to speak about when she used to wear them. So what happened then was Jane designed this box beside it, a very kind of, as you see, a wooden box, very familiar material to, and a very, I suppose, familiar piece to Gillian. And what she did was she got the brooch saying when you put that into the box, there was an RFID tag there. So when you place it in the box, it played recordings of music that she used to dance to, played recordings, say, of her maybe telling a story about dances they used to go to. So you can see they're a very kind of familiar object with the digital, I suppose, aspect kind of embedded within it. Can you see how that would work? I mean, what do you think of a design like that compared to, say, the previous ones, like the memory aids? Come on, you must have some thoughts on it.
It's much more personal.
Yeah.
Well, and it goes to a lot of different senses, auditory and like visual things she saw, and even maybe like the dress material, like feeling it. It's not just like one page.
Absolutely. And it's that, can you see there, I suppose as well, it's when we look at, I'm not trying to kind of brush all assistive technologies with the same brush here, that's the last thing I want to do, but I kind of want to differentiate where vulnerability comes into it. So, say if we had the likes of the sensors and so on, they're kind of, I suppose, containing the vulnerability, so minding the vulnerability to kind of protect it from the outside world. Whereas designs like this kind of, I don't know, I suppose they kind of support the vulnerability. I mean, these designs weren't plucked out of thin air, they came from a lot of time that Jane spent with these people and finding out what they wanted and tailoring stuff that was very evocative across all the senses, that actually meant something and was way more personal to that person. So, you know, in that case, she wasn't trying to, I suppose, diminish levels of vulnerability, but rather use it to greater good in a more positive way. Yeah, can you see that? Yeah, okay. So you probably think, say, with designs like this, it was kind of like a one-off piece, and you know, it's very, not that it's very easy, but you know, when you're in a small setting like that, and it's a couple, that you can kind of have more kind of like personal element to it and tailor it to suit those people. But there's also massive opportunities there on a more kind of generalized, generic level. More work that would have been done, images here are from, this is actually from a dementia ward in a hospital in the UK. So we can imagine in most hospital settings, you're talking, you know, very, very clinical looking, bare walls, floors, you know, a lot of, I suppose, scenes I would have seen in the case of dementia is, you know, patients maybe lined up around the walls and not a lot of interaction going on. And the staff in this hospital basically wanted, I suppose, to increase levels of interaction and communication and to get patients kind of more comfortable in a more familiar setting, and in turn kind of getting them to speak to kind of hold on to that sense of self, kind of, I suppose, support the vulnerability again. So what they did here, you'd see these pieces, it was kind of, I suppose, furniture that was familiar to the patients. So like, say, an old TV cabinet there, that would have been familiar to them as they were kind of growing up in their middle-aged years. Once again, kind of with that digital component hidden within. So those little globes that you see over there on the left-hand side, there would have been an image in that globe that would have maybe been evocative to some of the patients. When they lifted out this globe and put it on top of the TV set, a recording was played to match whatever was in that globe. And, you know, the result of this, it was a really positive effect, because, you know, patients started interacting with each other, they started interacting with these pieces. The staff were able to interact with them as a result, and all of a sudden there was a liveliness there that wasn't there before. Another thing to bear in mind as well is always kind of the caregiver, the family members kind of surrounding these patients, and this offered an opportunity for them to be involved in this process. So they were allowed to bring in kind of USB keys with kind of images or recordings that would have been very kind of, I suppose, familiar and evocative to their loved ones. And they had a way of accessing this in the ward then. So can you see then how it's still that personal kind of element, but it's in a more kind of generalised setting again. Okay. Now I suppose, like, we're looking at, you know, these are very, very, excuse my kind of lay language, it's very cool kind of devices. It doesn't necessarily have to be new devices. We can also use existing technology and do some pretty kind of interesting stuff with software for these technologies. And it's always worth bearing in mind this is a really interesting paper actually. And it was a 3-year study on how older people used email. And John Vines actually states in Newcastle how you should always be kind of wary of, these kind of presumptions you might have when you think this is what these people need. And I know I was guilty of it when I started my research. I'm like, okay, this is a problem area, they need this to be fixed. It's not necessarily the case to never presume anything before you kind of give that label of vulnerability over. Be very careful in doing that. So here what came out was, that elderly people, say when it comes to emails, they were interested in kind of better ways, say, to reply to emails, to attach photos was a big thing, attaching photographs. When it came to the actual kind of visual side of things, they said they preferred to put on their glasses than to have bigger font or anything like that on the screen. And as well as that, they preferred to use the mouse. They didn't want different things coming in just to suit their population. They wanted the mouse because everyone else was using it, okay? So it was it's a nice paper to read because it just makes you think of these presumptions you might have going into the context. So Circa is actually well worth looking up if you want to livinginthemoment.co.uk. So this was developed by the University of Dundee and St Andrews, and it's on the back of that whole reminiscence therapy that I was talking about. So it's computer interactive reminiscence and conversational aid. That's what Circa stands for. So it's an easy to use computer program that helps support conversation between people with dementia and their caregivers and relatives. The system contains an extensive collection of archived photographs, video clips, and popular music, which is easy to access by touching the screen. So you can see there's obviously reminiscence therapy does work, but this is being done in such, I suppose, intuitive way. And you can imagine as well, kind of, it's hard work bringing along these old photographs and finding objects, and this is something where it's all located in one piece, and you can very easily using the touch screen and a device get access to it. And it's had really, really positive effects, and there's lots of people using it. If you actually go onto the website, you can click kind of the YouTube clip there of how it actually works and what you see and what you hear and so on. So there's kind of like another example that it doesn't have to be all kind of new technologies, that it can also be existing technologies and design software around that. I suppose where we're going to go to next is special educational needs in the classroom. Now, one of the papers that I put up there, I don't know if you had a chance to read it, was the one on neurodiversity. Okay, have a look at it later on. As I say, there won't be any questions asked in it, I'll be reading a lot from it as I go on. But I think it's a short paper, and it was it's a 2013 paper, and it was just a really, really one of those kind of eye-opener ones again, that very kind of provocative and makes you address these issues. So the term neurodiversity was coined by Judy Singer, a sociologist with Asperger's syndrome and autistic rights advocate, writing as part of self-advocacy movement. Her notion of neurodiversity was that autism and Asperger's were not an affliction, but another state of being, with equal rights to live and reproduce. The neurodiversity community uses the term neurotypical to label the larger kind of normal society, the neurotypical society. I don't know, are any of you here actually doing the special ed module this year? I don't know. Yeah. So this would you'd probably see a lot of similarities what I'm talking about here, which what you would have already covered. But it's this notion of kind of embracing the neurodiverse, okay? So from a HCI perspective, they say that optimizing the interaction with software with only one cognitive model is slowly eroding its use by those with different cognitive strengths and weaknesses. And that the primary contribution to knowledge, say, of their paper was to make HCI aware of new and growing social movements, which provides a critical perspective from which to view the process and practices of HCI. The core demand of neurodiversity is mutual respect for different ways of being. For interaction designers and researchers, this is partly an expectation not to reinforce this social exclusion already widely experienced. Partly this is about pushing research and making users' access to resources vary to acknowledge different points of view and experiences. Essentially what it is, it's not going back to that whole, finding a context for the vulnerable to make them fit into our situation, or even the vulnerable us giving that label. There's questions around that. But, giving context to give, to support that ability in there. So they speak a lot about people, say, suffering from autism who have got great strengths that someone who wouldn't be suffering from autism have. And it's about bringing those strengths out and supporting them and catering for the neurodiverse, as opposed to just making the neurodiverse easier fit into neurotypical situations. Because I'm speaking about autism, one of the papers I put up there was a really interesting example actually of kind of the use of software in the classroom. So kind of if I'm repeating what you're already done in special ed, we'd see it as reinforcement, qualities, but I'll continue anyway. So interventions to support individuals with autism often include the use of a wide variety of visual tools, okay? So these artifacts draw on words, images, and tangible objects to represent concrete and abstract real-world concepts, okay? So the use of these visual artifacts, in particular for individuals with autism, have been shown to reduce symptoms associated with cognitive, communication, and social disabilities, okay? So there's a positive effect, there's a reason we're using these visual displays. A visual schedule is a set of pictures or words that cues someone to engage in a sequence of activities. Okay, so instead of, let's say, giving an order, you use these visual schedules as a way to carry out a task. They present the abstract concepts of activities and time in concrete forms by using pictures, words, and other visual elements to describe what will happen, in what order, and where. They have been used successfully in classrooms, homes, and private practices to actually lessen anxiety and problems with sequential memory, organisation of time, and language comprehension, okay? In schools, they can assist students with transitioning independently between activities and environments. However, despite the benefits of visual schedules, there are certain limitations that hinder their use in the setting. So you're talking there about, it can be difficult to record data for tracking student progress. Also using traditional based paper tools, it can be quite time consuming, and a lot of work's involved in organising these visual schedules and kind of displaying them, changing them. If something else during a task changes during the day, kind of updating them, so it was quite time consuming. So the VSCED system kind of saw an opportunity for design here. I went, okay, this is something that already works in this context. How can we, I suppose, improve on that? Okay, but taking into account not only the child in the classroom, but also, say, the teachers, because they're the ones who have to I suppose the student is the one who uses them, but the teacher is the one who's putting all the effort into developing them. So is there an opportunity there for HCI to make a difference? So what the system actually was, it built kind of feel what there was already there and on participatory design, and that's something that Kelly will be speaking to you about next week. She's our participatory design guru, so she'll be filling in on that next week. So it was an interactive, collaborative visual scheduling system designed for elementary school classrooms. And it did result in reductions in staff effort required to use the visual supports. And it also resulted in improvements in perceived quality and quantity of communication and social interactions in the classroom. Okay, so it was actually getting people, to increase their levels of interaction. Okay, so what did it consist of? I mean, it was three interfaces. Okay, so it was a large touchscreen device at the top of the room. The teacher had a device, and each student had a device. Okay, so the image I show you there would be one of the ones that would be on the smaller devices. So at the top of the room, the large one, you had every single student's visual schedule for the day. Okay, and as the schedule changed, the teacher could manipulate that on their own, which would be displayed on the large one at the top of the room. But also the students had a control there. So when the students looked at it, and say they were being assigned an activity, and they'd look at it, and they could choose it or do it. If they weren't doing it, if they weren't picking up in the queue, or if they had difficulty in picking the right answer, the device then removed the wrong answers and made it easier for them to find the right one. Okay, so it was very much kind of that sense of empowerment being given as well. That it was no longer, can you see that it was no longer kind of just what the teacher was telling them to do, but they had an input in it too. Once again, that ability being brought out by the use of the technology. Another interesting one in relation to special educational needs, and was 2013 paper as well, and this was a paper that it was experience-centred design inquiry, and it looked into the current and potential role of digital photography to support interpersonal communication and expression in a class of mixed special educational needs. Okay, so in this class we have people suffering from epilepsy, cerebral palsy, learning difficulties, autism as well. So we had a room you can see with a lot of vulnerable populations, let's say, in that. And what they did was they had 5 classroom-based creative photography workshops, and that engaged pupils with a broad range of complex special needs, as I said, but along with the staff. Okay, so once again, it wasn't just one user; it was taking all the stakeholders in that situation, their input and how they kind of prefer this work, and how not kind of dissing what went before and just making it better, taking what went before and using it to improve. So like basically what they did was like the use of like say ICT in the classroom was not something new, it's something that has like a strong history and successful history in the classroom, but they wanted to do something new, different, which will get greater insight. And I suppose just to kind of stop there for a second, the one thing I'd love for you to take away from today is that once again, when you hear design, it's not all about say the final product. When we hear say technology in these situations, it's not just about the technology, it's about how it came into being. Design is very much a methodology as it is a final outcome. So when we're looking back there at the examples of the pieces of dresses that lady had, that's all design. I mean, another example that came out of that study was a necklace, and at the end of that necklace was a cloud shape. So it was like a little filter, so you hold it up to different objects and you could look through the cloud and see it. That was just mirroring the kind of the sense of humour of the lady that was wearing it. That wasn't a digital piece. No, that was design. So design is not there's no such thing as final kind of piece and a separate research that went on. They're all the two are heavily kind of ingrained in the other. So what they did here with this study was over 5 workshops, they kind of get different tasks. In the workshop there was a costume box, so the students were encouraged to come in and take different costumes out, and then they were paired up. So the kids were given cameras to take a picture of everyone in their costumes, and at the end of the day they were asked to pick their favourite pictures. And the next workshop then those favourite pictures were put into project books. So the 2 objects you see at the top, each student was given a project book and their photographs went into that, their favourite ones. The next workshop, they were interested in different ways of looking. So the things at the bottom is like a frame, and the magic frame, they call it the magic filters. So when you were taking the photo, you put up this frame and play around with what they were seeing, okay? So, what this resulted in, I mean, first of all, it gave insights into a mixed special ed classroom, how the experience of the teachers, the experience of the children, a better understanding, a contribution to knowledge of what goes on in that. But as well as that, then that resulted in a final piece being offered as well to make that environment kind of a better environment, let's say. So what they had was a photo sorting device. So each child had a console and a card that when they were using their own PC, let's say, in the room, they could look through their photos, pick their different photos and pick what was going on it. As well as that, then the teacher also had kind of an editorial device, so they had a device where they could monitor what kids were doing and they could pick different pictures to use and so on. And all this was going towards a wall display then, say, in the corridor, where different images were put up, but sounds were also attached to it. So when visitors came into the school, there was say a magic wand, they called it, at the bottom, which was an RFID piece of technology. When you swipe it over the picture, a sound was activated as well. So can you see there, I suppose, what kind of, how that would be a new addition to that environment? Yeah? Are you completely lost? Can you see there, say, parents coming in, teachers coming in, it's once again kids being involved, a new task for them, communication levels went up, interaction levels went up. And bear in mind, that's a hard thing to do in a context where you have so many different populations, okay? That's a hard thing to achieve. And as well as that, then when you're thinking of the other stakeholders, so parents coming in and visitors coming into the school, seeing these wall displays on the way in, this is only being facilitated because of technology, because research has been done in that area. Otherwise, it would still be the traditional way of doing things. So there's great opportunities here in these setups. Before I go on, say I've special ed there, the next thing I'm going to be going on to is mental illness. Quite a positive thing to go on to. But what I suggest here is we could take maybe 5-10 minutes, you could grab a cup of coffee, or we can work through. It's entirely up to you, but maybe you want to get a glass of water, a bit of fresh air. Say, what do you think? Yeah? 5 minutes? Yeah, okay, say 5-10 minutes and we'll come back here and we'll go through the rest of it. Okay, thanks guys. So next thing, as I said, moving on to mental illness, which can also be seen as a vulnerable label to give someone. I'm looking in particular at borderline personality disorder, okay? And that is defined as difficulty regulating emotions, to control impulsive and disruptive behaviours, for example, self-harm, as well as disruptions in a person's self-image and the ability to form and maintain relationships with other people. Is comorbid with depression and PTSD, and basically they're saying, where it comes from, and say a disposition to it, but coupled with an environment of usually neglect and abuse. Okay, so some of you might have done abnormal psychology with Sean Hammond. So you would have come across this before. So that's kind of, I suppose, the definition of what it is. And what I want to look at is work being carried out by an ETM in Culture Lab in Newcastle, and she's a psychology background as well. And her research is called Spheres of Wellbeing. So she's looking at this borderline personality disorder, and she's looking at it in a women's secure hospital service. Okay, so women are coming forward with profound emotional regulation problems that impact on their behaviour, sense of self, once again, that we've touched on before, and relationships with other people. Interactions with the design are designed to motivate engagement with dialectical behavioural therapy. Okay, so that's a therapy of choice for borderline personality disorder that we probably already saw before in the other module, and to improve their quality of life and mental well-being more generally. DBT has been shown to be effective in teaching, say, the women in this context, really important skills such as distress tolerance and mindfulness. And the therapy also focuses on validating the individual by empathically acknowledging, say, her feelings, thoughts and behaviours, and attempts to continuously motivate and reinforce her to practice the thought skills. Okay, so it's just learning within therapy. The underlying purpose of the programme is to enhance an individual's quality of life. And the design concept here of Spheres of Wellbeing builds on this therapy approach, while interactions with the spheres are aimed at supporting the women in practices of mindfulness to help them tolerate emotional distress and to strengthen their sense of self. Okay, and I think this is it's a really kind of sensitive and interesting design, because for us, I suppose, in the Department of Applied Psychology, you're taking what could be defined as a vulnerable population, but you're also taking what works. Now, similarly to what we're looking at in the case of autism, you're taking something that already works in that area and goes through that and designing around it. Similar in this case as well. So this therapy works, and it's a matter of, using that in a way that's different or maybe novel to people. Is there someone looking to come in? Don't. Okay. And you're watching outside the door. So what the design consists of are 3 objects. Okay, so the one you see at the bottom, that's called the mindfulness sphere. Okay, and basically what this does is reflects a person's heartbeat. Okay, so if you're in a state of panic and you're holding it, it mirrors that. It mirrors your heart rate. So the ball will be bouncing, you feel it moving. Also, there's different lights onto LED sensors that will display different colours depending on what your heart is doing. So you can imagine that way, if all you have to concentrate on is your heart rate, that will be all you concentrate on. You'll be trying to slow down the speed of the ball, you'll be trying to change the colour. So inadvertently, it's kind of reinforcing the role of DBT in that context. Yeah? You see how it does? Okay. Another one here is the calming sphere, and that's kind of the bracelets you see there on the right hand side. Once again, not a digital piece of technology, but nevertheless a piece of design research, okay? And like the bracelet, women can hold on to at times of emotional stress, And the identity sphere is another one I don't have up there, but it invites women to engage with short personalised videos, allowing them to explore and reconnect to meaningful experiences and positive aspects of their life. And this is it's housed in the leather wallet. It's very personal to each of the women. And basically when they open it, then they can see different videos. Okay, so I thought it was really I would highly recommend reading those papers, because it really reinforced what I'm talking about, this whole way to design and the opportunities that come out of these contexts as a methodology, let's say. The other thing I want to point out here is, there are, say, vulnerable groups that we think of. But going back to vulnerability as a human condition, we can all maybe find ourselves in vulnerable situations. Now, the situations I'm about to describe, I hope none of us find ourselves in these situations. But it's just highlighting, we can find ourselves in different contexts where we are the vulnerable ones. Even the ones who give the labels, we can ourselves be vulnerable. And the first one I'm going to look at is domestic violence, and this is coming from research being done by Rachel Clark. So domestic violence is defined as an incident of threatening behaviour, violence or abuse between adults who have been intimate partners or family members. It can include a range of psychological, physical, sexual, financial or emotional impediments that impact on an individual's self-esteem and longer-term familial and social relationships. Okay, so that's the definition of what it is. What the paper actually explores, and what this research explores, is the potential of photography, once again, of lives after domestic violence. So they worked in the context of a women's centre, so a women's shelter, where women are accessing support after leaving abusive relationships. The paper contributes a feminist participatory arts action research approach, and once again that will be, as you go along in this module, you'll be getting the theory behind those terms. To studying photo sharing practices, and helps to frame an understanding of the ongoing tensions in the construction of self with others that women experience. Okay, so this is a relatively new area in HCI, and it's very exciting. It's I suppose, the wrong word when you're using it in such a negative context, but it's, from a design point of view, it's very, very exciting to see work like this being done to help understand a situation. Not just to put a piece of technology there, but to actually help what's going on there. We're here to study people. This is what this is. And existing research that had been done in technology in this context always saw communication technology as a double-edged sword, because I don't know if any of you have ever volunteered in women's shelters. I briefly did for a while there. Even a mobile phone can be seen as a positive support, so you can still contact people, but it's also a way of your abuser to contact you, okay? And in those situations, there's a lot of manipulation, there's a lot of going on, so it's very, it's very easy to stay in contact with the abuser and maybe go back. So, there has been a bit of ambiguity around the role of technology in these situations. So what this research does is that it highlights the importance of understanding the process of engaging with photography as a socio-technical creative practice, supporting the reconstruction of self with new relations. The focus is on the longitudinal use of technology to support women rather than exclusively on communication through a crisis or disruption. Okay, so they're highlighting here how it can support the women there rather than information or communication, let's say, purpose of technology. So just to describe the image I have there, so Rachel designed the pack as part of a workshop process that both drew from aspects of previous probe design and use, and I think probe design, Kelly would have spoken about that recently, different ways of getting people's stories out during a piece of design research. And use them as part of a longer term engagement, a structured individual and group reflection. Okay, so it was using these probes, not just say, okay, we've got a design idea now, let's go with it, but using them to over a longer term to better understand the situation. They designed the pack encouraged reflection on the things in the women's lives they valued, informing as part of themselves. Okay, so this situation where it's a very, very vulnerable situation. So it's trying to hold on to who you are to get that strength. So the pack comes a digital camera, a sound recorder and a portrait frame, and a set of inspiration tokens that were put together in this small velvet bag. And instructions were included that invited the women to photograph or sound record aspects of their lives that they valued. So the women could store the contents alongside photographs taken and keep them private where necessary. Okay, and this was another thing that came up. Say Rachel states here that women articulated some agency in the different themes they chose to focus on. Okay, so the different things that were important to them. However, their use of the technology wasn't consistent and equal across the group and highlighted tensions, challenges, frustrations, and sometimes disinterest. Okay, so it wasn't a case of all use these probes, great, fantastic, it's all working. That definitely wasn't the case. It was a really kind of, it was a volatile situation, and you can't, when you're dealing with a group of women like that who've been put in that position, some of them just didn't want to have anything to do with it. Some of them was like, okay, this is my private business, I don't want to share it with the rest of the group. So it's all these issues at play, and I was trying to understand those and use and get something out of that to make that context a bit more able, I suppose. So the emphasis of the research had been on the creative potential of technology, and this brought into dialogue different understandings, expectations, and interests, which both expanded the centre and the women's experiences of technology and the researchers' appreciation of the complexity of a diverse set of social practices. Okay, so it was a real kind of eye-opener to the researcher as well, a very much a learning experience. The three kind of qualities that emerged from the use of this design was embodied expressions of relationships. Okay, so relationships that were formed between other women in the centre. Balancing coming togetherness and an independence. So, okay, that's what you take from meeting as a group, and also kind of the independence that you get as participating maybe in this group or making these friendships. And negotiated sharing practices, so that the whole issue around keeping something private, learning to trust someone, to share someone, that kind of trust is probably at 0 levels when you're going into a centre like that, I can only imagine. So it's trying to build on that ability to trust. Do you see that kind of as an interesting example? It's would you've ever come across kind of, you might have seen now because of technology and what I've already spoken about today, is this kind of something that would be new to you, this example here? Yeah, okay. Okay, the last one I'm going to give there is actually, it was a piece of research that I came across last year, and it still was kind of in its early stages, but once again it was one of those really kind of thought-provoking papers. It was called Soundscape. And basically what it was a new approach to managing anxiety and chronic pain in clinical settings. So using soundscape composition based on sound walks, what they did was they were hoping that people coming to a clinical setting, so waiting to see their doctor, they can get very anxious in the waiting room, whereas looking at people around you who are suffering, what you're going to say to the doctor, how you're feeling that morning, all these things go through your head, but by the time you get out, you can be quite anxious, and how then you translate your symptoms across can get a bit mixed up in this anxiety. So the whole purpose of this design was to calm people down, to see would this have an effect on, first of all, their overall well-being, and secondly, kind of how they were presenting themselves then to the doctor. It's a typical, very much an Irish thing. I know when we go to the doctor, it's very much, oh, sure, I'm grand, and your throat could be falling out, but this kind of, so it's kind of worked on that, like how you approach the doctor, and that result then in better kind of diagnosis and better care as well. So have you come across sound walks before or soundscapes before? So basically what it is, it's a framed exercise in active listening. Okay, so a sound walk could take place anywhere such as a park, restaurant, or in the city block. Sound walks have been organised for various groups, including urban planning and music concerts. And it's a virtual kind of context. So the participant experiences the acoustic environment as a 3D recording played through headphones. Okay, so what you're hearing is, I'm going to try and describe it. So say if we were here and I wanted to do maybe a sound walk of walking around UCC main campus. So the idea is we put on our headphones, but in that we hear the very real life experience of taking that walk. You'd hear your own footsteps. You'd hear the band of your shoes going up the steps on the way up the hill. You'd hear the crunch maybe going across the stones kind of over by the quad and stuff. And hearing kind of the surround sounds that would be happening at this hour of the evening. Okay, so it's very much kind of a 3D walkthrough, all auditory. Okay, so they were in the stages kind of trying that out and seeing what wasn't working, and tentatively they were saying that it was having a positive success, but definitely is one to catch up on and see what's happening on. So that was just kind of another example of maybe a vulnerable situation we could find ourselves in, and the use of technology there. The other thing, I'm going to move on to now is something that's very close to my own heart at the moment, and that's researcher vulnerability. Now, did anyone get a chance to read that paper? So it was the paper that I wrote, so who was the vulnerable one? Okay, I won't take it personally at all. It was a great paper, you should read it. What I'll do is I have some copies of it here, I'm going to hand it out. Now, it's a very, very short paper, but I'm not going to get you to read it. But maybe take it away with you later on and have a look. So, what kind of it's about is, see the context I've been giving there, and we have the domestic violence section of the researcher going into it. You have the dementia care context, researcher going into that. The secure women's facility. And these aren't exactly, they're not easy contexts to be going into. So what I was interested in here was that kind of not only can potential users of the design be defined as vulnerable, but equally the researchers and designers themselves entering the user's lived experience can also be considered as vulnerable. Okay, so what I'm talking about there is, traditionally say in the field of counselling psychology, it's mandatory that you attend supervision and you attend your own counselling. And the whole purpose of that is when you're dealing with different clients, if they present something to you, say you have a client come in who just recently had a bereavement, suffered a bereavement, and say you're just back from work after suffering from bereavement as well. It offers a place for you to go where you can talk about that because it brings up something within you, okay? And it is a space for you to talk about it so you can look after your own well-being. But at the same time, by doing that, it means that you're not blocking your client's development. So when you go back to the client, you're going to give them the full attention they need and address their bereavement, as opposed to letting your own bereavement block theirs, okay? Now, I'm not saying that all researchers are counselling psychologists, but I'm very interested in that kind of who protects the researcher. I'm not saying all situations we go into will be vulnerable, but in some cases they are, and that kind of needs to be addressed too. We're only human beings, and very much kind of in HCI, it's you're encouraged to develop this empathic relationship with people, and being empathic towards someone means you take their own feelings on board, you try to see things from their perspective, and when you're going in, just say in the case of dementia, it's one that I'm closest to at the moment. If you walk into, say, a hospital, say you've never experienced dementia before, and there's a lady in bed and she doesn't recognise her daughter, and you're walking into that setting, like they're the experts in their lives. They're living their lives. They're the experts in theirs. The doctors in there, the nurses in there. It's their job to deal with dementia patients. It's everything they have in common. As you're walking in there, you're the one who's vulnerable. You're the expert in research, let's say, but going into that context, you haven't been experienced this before. So what happens around that? How can you, first of all, kind of get over your own anxiety, and which it is, it's a source of anxiety. Well, how am I going to do this? I haven't experienced it before. How do I not come across like an idiot and not knowing what I'm talking about? So how do you handle that? Then to do a piece of research, taking into account the feelings you might be experiencing, and what do you do with them? Okay, so once again, you don't want the position of something that comes up within you as you're researching kind of blocking your research. But what do you do with it then? So a lot in HCI research, especially participatory design, a lot actually in all qualitative research, is this notion of reflectivity and reflexivity, to incorporate your own feelings in it. Okay, inevitably, all research doing that you're involved in, there will be a subjective element to it, and it's really important to document these. I mean, a lot of my field notes, you'll see me saying things like, I felt like this when this happened, and it's really important to hear your own voice in there, because you'll see from the designs I was showing you around by James, they had the couple who was suffering from dementia. That was a personal relationship, and she spent a lot of work establishing that relationship and getting them to trust her. So those designs weren't just coming from the couple, they were coming from Jane's input too, and it was capturing that relationship. So it was actually, making room for design for your own voice, but kind of striking a balance kind of in between that. I suppose where I was going to read out to there, just give you, because I'm conscious of time now, I don't want to keep you, I'm just going to give you kind of a few quotes from my own kind of research, and I kind of narrow it down into 4 points that we should consider. And I'm speaking about kind of the difference of going into a small research context. I'm going into people's homes, into their private dwellings, okay, where there's a family member suffering from dementia, and they're still, the family members are caring for them, okay. And what I'm trying to say is there's certain things that you're going to experience and be expected to do that you mightn't necessarily be expected to do in a larger setting. So if you're going into a hospital setting, say the timetable's set, you're in there to do your research, you can go again. There's people there to take care of the patients. You're in to do your research and you're gone. When you're trying to get, as a researcher, no matter what the context is, when you're trying to get into a family setting, you have to earn their trust. You have to, basically become their friends, become part of their lives. You can't just slip in for an hour and leave again. There's certain obligations that you can, like, how are the kids keeping, how was your day? You form a lot of personal relationships around more than, say, just a participant of your research. And certain kind of, you feel like, say, the best time for you to do your research is from 2 to 4 on a Tuesday. But you know what, it really doesn't suit, say, the person in that family. They're like, okay, I've got shopping to do and it doesn't suit. You have to be able to swing around and change those times, make adjustments to your own research. But it's that kind of going back to our own kind of anxiety and situation. One of my notes here is, this was when I was in a house. So the 3 of us made our way from the sitting room to the kitchen. Dee asked, was her father dead? Yes, ma'am, he died a long time ago now, replied her daughter. Dee in turn claiming, I'm all alone so, to which her daughter responded, sure you have me. What if I had been there alone with Dee? Could I have answered so quickly to the question, is my father dead? What if she'd asked a question that I didn't have the answer to? I worry about distressing her. And that was something very real for me at the initial stages, because the people, they are quite distracted, and short-term memory is fading, and they are asking questions about the past. But when a woman asks you, where's my husband? And if her husband has died many years previously, how quickly can you respond, or can you respond with, he's dead or he passed away? What are the rules around that? How do you say it? And it's that kind of, learning how to do that, but also talking to family members on how best to address this. And every case is different. As I said before, dementia is experienced in different ways. Caregiving is experienced in different ways then as a result. Just in relation to kind of vulnerability and expertise, I have a quote there. It was a very strange moment, me sitting there recognising Dee in the photo, getting a glimpse of what she was like. Dee looking at it, recognising herself. I had 2 Dees in the room with me, demented Dee holding non-demented Dee. I wanted to take a picture. What was going through her head? Why did she ask for it? Of course I'm projecting these questions, I'm writing them into the story. And what it was is, as I was coming into the sitting room, I was looking at this picture of this participant from maybe 10 years previously. And she asked to see it, and it was very much me as a researcher looking at this situation, and she was holding this photograph of herself and trying to make out who it was. Now, my expertise is supposed to be as a researcher, so observations like this are really important to make, and to be looking out for these kind of things, because these in turn will influence your overall design as well. But it's what you do with them. I'm writing them into the story. Okay, so what I'm exploring at the moment, and like your input would be greatly appreciated, is that kind of holding that expertise but not making it kind of, I suppose, block you and apply to everyone. Yes, these things are worth observing and pointed out, but it's not the case for every situation. And it's trying to find that balance between expertise and, once again, that reflexivity, that ability to move across situations. Just because you come, let's say, off a research study, studying people with dementia, doesn't mean the next research study you're going to move on is going to be the same. It's to take the skills you've taken from the last one into the new one, without doing so in a way that blocks you or makes you presume the final result is going to be the final result of the last one. Okay, so it's making these observations in a way that you constantly question yourself as well. Investment and personal connection are another 2 issues that I think kind of research vulnerability. And this was me talking about a client visit that I had that day, participant visit. So 2 things held me back from cancelling, aside from the guilt of letting my supervisor and my research down. The first was Ella might have plans made to do something while I was with her. That would be Ella's caregiver. And would it be unfair of me to make her change those plans when she struggles enough planning her life around his care And secondly, or liked me, what if he was disappointed that I didn't go? Okay, and there's an investment there that I'm saying that mightn't necessarily be the case. I'm not saying it isn't the case, but definitely in a smaller research setting in a person's home, these are considerations you'd make. You know, it might be if you're just a researcher slotting in for 2 to 3 somewhere else in a more large scale setting. There is a difference when letting someone down. When there's a family expecting they make plans around that, especially caregivers saying, right, when you're here, I might pop out for an hour because I have something to do. So these are considerations you have to take on board as well. When you're doing these things. And it's also that kind of personal connection as well, is that, you know, as much as you're looking to establish trust with these people and go part of their lives, don't forget the mirror side of that. They're becoming part of yours. If you put that amount of investment into building a relationship with someone, you're going to miss them too when they're gone, okay? And it's trying to, that whole role of empathy and trying to establish empathy in a relationship, that can actually go both ways. So as you become closer to a person, they're developing a sense of empathy around you. So you don't want a situation where, say, I'm bringing in design into that context and I want to evaluate how well it works. If there's a person going, well, I don't want to hurt Mary's feelings, you know, she put a lot of effort into this, it's great, I like it. You know, and when it mightn't be the case at all. Or else you might be in a situation when, you know, it's really important to my research that I find out about this particular area, but I don't really want to ask a question because it's going to upset them. You know, and that's where kind of the blurriness or the fogginess of personal connection might get in the way. I was trying to keep that balance, you know, to where you can still be objective to the research, but still subjective in that relationship, if that makes sense. And I'm just saying that, you know, to kind of be aware of that, and to kind of mind yourself in it. You know what I mean? It's one thing that when I was like putting through my ethics forms and everything for my PhD, is to kind of to consider that, okay, well, if I'm struggling, where can I go with that? Who can help me? And to use the support services around you, be it like student counselling or, you know, say talk to someone who's done a similar piece of research before, but just to hear your own voice as well in a way that kind of protects your own well-being, but at the same time then as well doesn't jeopardise your research and makes better research for both you and the participant. So once again, your own ability being used to the best that it can be. I suppose there I'm going to wrap up. Like I know the video here is a bit of a thing, but if you have any questions, please ask. If you don't, if there's anything I've said today, if you want more readings, if you just have question marks regarding PhDs in general, please contact me. I blog there, you know, as much as I can, and probably should do a bit more just about kind of PhD research in general and topic. And Twitter, I'm usually on Twitter and more so kind of academic things that we tweet about, and I'm hoping to follow actually. But you know, there might be some things you see that would be of interest. Speak about that and mention it. And that's it. Does it make sense? Yeah? Okay guys, thank you for your attention. I know it's late in the evening. Okay, thank you.